I'm in my early 30s, and recently I've gotten really into dispersed camping. Essentially, packing a tent and camping gear into my truck and then driving out and camping on public lands. Sometimes it was on small trails off the side of a highway or on forest roads. Either way, I loved it. This was during a drive where I actually had a destination, which was my older sister's place in Bend, Oregon. Along the highway on my third night of driving, I pulled off on a small trail with a few dispersed camping spots, just flat areas to park and set up at. The highway I was on was one of those single-lane, very desolate roads. Not many people on it at all, and the trail I was camping on wasn't marked or anything either. It was just some random pull-off that formed from other cars or trucks over the years. Although it was pretty overgrown, so it didn't look like it was hardly ever used. Maybe a couple cars a year, if that. By the time I parked and got set up, the sun was down and I was exhausted. I was a day ahead on my drive, so I didn't mind going to bed early and staying an extra day tomorrow to relax. I still made dinner and tried to enjoy a campfire, but got inside the tent and tried to sleep around 8:30. I woke up a little past midnight, I think 12:15-ish. The only reason I know that is because I was up long enough that I eventually checked my phone. I couldn't get back to sleep. However, I also didn't know why I'd woken up to begin with. Maybe my body unconsciously heard something while I was sleeping. But for a whole hour I laid there awake with no idea why I couldn't sleep. Until I heard a scream. It was for sure a woman's voice, and it sounded pretty far, but I couldn't tell how far. It seemed to come from the direction of where the highway was, about a half-mile away. After that one scream though, there was nothing. Complete silence. Don't get me wrong, it freaked me out, but I think as time passed, I started to second guess whether it really was a woman, or if I had mistaken an animal call. Where I was, the chances someone else was out here not just driving, and screamed just once, it didn't add up. Eventually, with the silence, I fell back asleep. In the morning, and that whole day really, nothing happened. It was a relaxing, chill day hanging out at the campsite. However, as soon as the sun went down, I heard it again. That scream. I had just started my campfire and was wide awake and heard it as clear as day. It 100% came from the road. Obviously, writing this back, I definitely should have just left or at least not done what I'm about to tell you. It was stupid, but I decided to walk out a half-mile to the highway and look around. I think because the sun had just gone down, it felt safer than going out truly in the middle of the night. And I felt I either had to check now or never check and never have answers. What if it was a woman needing help? And honestly, I thought the worst that could happen is I get there and see something that I don't like and just run back to my truck and leave. Anyway, I got my flashlight and I walked out there, hearing her scream and yell every couple of minutes. And each time it was louder, so I was definitely getting closer. Until just as I was getting up to the highway, I realized I hadn't heard her scream in a few minutes. I walked up and onto the shoulder of the road. It was dead quiet and completely deserted. Every direction I looked was either empty road or pitch black forest. The lack of sound was almost more unsettling than the scream I was hearing. I stayed there for a good 4 or 5 minutes before getting too uneasy and starting to walk back. The walk back felt long and, well, uncomfortable. There was that itching feeling like something wasn't right, but I didn't know what to do about it. The fact the scream stopped once I got up to the road was a disturbing thing to think about. Like, had someone seen me? The woods stayed quiet though, and eventually I could see my tent and campfire still burning. But when I got closer, I saw something move. There was someone at my campsite, a woman, walking around and looking through my stuff. She didn't look like she was trying to be sneaky or cautious, though. She actually looked so calm and unconcerned that it freaked me out even more. Why wasn't she scared of me coming back to the campsite? It made me hesitant to approach and confront her. And then she walked around the fire, sat in my chair, and didn't move. The woman was waiting for me. Something about her and this whole situation wasn't right at all. She didn't move or look around. She just faced forward, motionless, sitting there and waiting. I stayed behind a tree and watched. No way in hell I was going up there until she left. And I ended up being there for an unnerving amount of time, possibly 2 or 3 hours. The woman stayed sitting in the chair motionless for that entire time, even as the flames from the fire started to burn out, until it went fully dark. I couldn't see anything anymore. A few minutes of this overwhelming darkness passed, and then I heard that scream again, right from my campsite. Few moments later, footsteps started crunching on the leaves, heading toward me. They got closer and closer. I mean, like just a few feet away from me. That's how dark it was. The footsteps passed right by me and continued down the trail toward the highway. Once they faded out, I turned on my light and ran to my camp, packing up and leaving immediately. I didn't see her on the road or the trail when I left. I made it to Bend, and after that, I never camped in any desolate place like that again, not alone. I'm not even going to try to give some sort of explanation for what happened out there. This was 3 years ago, when I was 28. Now, I don't mean this in any sort of bragging way at all. I know I'm very lucky and fortunate, but my family has always been somewhat wealthy. Not over the top crazy rich, but definitely past the typical comfort level. Growing up, my parents had inherited a decent-sized lake house property from my grandparents, and back then it would have been considered pretty nice. But my parents didn't use it much, or take that much care of it, because it was so far and very inconvenient to get to. It was secluded deep in a forest about 6 hours north from us. My dad did the bare minimum just to keep it safe and maintained, but that was it. They didn't make any updates to it or anything, leaving it as my grandparents had left it. Before this trip, I'd only been there once, and I was so young I didn't really remember it. But over summer, I thought I'd enjoy a short vacation to the lake house to have some time by myself. I got the keys from my parents and drove 6 hours up there. Saying this place was remote would be an understatement, because it was literally in the middle of a massive empty forest. The gravel road up to the house was 40 minutes long, and all the surrounding land was unoccupied hunting properties with no houses or cabins. When I parked in the driveway and got out, I stood there for a couple minutes, just listening to how quiet it was. The kind of quiet that is really rare these days, enough to give you chills on its own. I was sure I would get used to it, though. I headed in, and despite the place being very outdated and a little dusty, it seemed untouched. Everything almost looked staged, like a rental Airbnb or something. I spent the rest of that evening unpacking, setting up stuff, and just looking around the house. At night, I sat on the balcony and looked over the small lake for a while, then went to bed. I woke up in the morning after probably 10 hours of sleep, but I felt less well rested than I thought I should have, having slept for so long. Thought it was just an off day, or like my body wasn't fully comfortable being alone out there yet to go into deep sleep. I didn't know. However, right when I went downstairs, I saw something taped to the front door. It was one of those old doors with decorative glass paneling, so I could see the paper taped on the outside of the glass. I was taken aback before even checking what it was. Who else was out here? And why the hell did they come up to the lake house in the middle of the night? I was seriously creeped out just seeing it. I went up and opened the door. It was quiet, except for wind and the regular forest sounds. No one seemed to be around, and also I didn't see any other tracks on the driveway from anyone pulling up to the house. Whoever it was must have walked here. I grabbed the paper and closed the door. It was a folded up note with just 2 words. Come out. That was it. It just said come out with no explanation or anything. It honestly felt too mysterious, like someone was trying too hard to be creepy. Like, was this some sort of weird joke some hunters in the area were playing on me? I told myself that it had to be a joke. I didn't know why, or even how to find out why, but I texted my parents just to ask in case there was something I was missing. I went on with my day, mostly sitting out by the lake and watching the water. My parents never texted me back though, and for the first 5-ish hours, I assumed they were just busy or whatever. But when I finally checked, I realized my text never even went through. I had no service. Last night, I had just a single bar of service, so maybe it was just spotty and would come back at some point. I tried not to worry. This was supposed to be a relaxing retreat away from being on my phone and all that stuff anyway. Up until around 10 p.m., I did actually manage to have a good time and enjoy the quiet of being alone out there. I made food, sat on the balcony, and then went upstairs to watch TV in bed. It still had one of those old DVD players connected, and there were some older movie discs stashed in the closet. I began sifting through them, but before I even picked one out, I heard something downstairs. Sounded like just a couple of thumps, maybe out on the balcony by the back door. I stayed put and listened for a minute, just to see if I heard anything else, but then I got up and walked downstairs. Right away, I saw another piece of paper taped to the door. The back door this time, though, that led out to the overview of the lake. I slowly walked over, then stayed by the door and looked out the glass for several minutes, scared to open it. I never saw anything, though. I checked out the other windows and stayed very on edge for 30 minutes before finally opening the door to grab the note. It was the exact same message. Come out. Now, this was very clearly not some joke. I wanted to leave, but the problem was the note literally telling me to come out. And seeing as both times this person visited in the middle of the night, it felt like a death sentence to leave the lake house and run all the way out to my car. What if the person was still out there? I mean, they likely were, probably in the dark, watching the house right now. I went around checking every door and window, being absolutely sure everything was locked. Then I went back upstairs to the bedroom and locked myself in. It felt safer up there, without all the big windows everywhere that someone could be looking at me through. I told myself I'd wait out the night and leave first thing in the morning once I was sure it was safer. I stayed up very late, 3 or 4 hours passed when I got that second note. I think it was 2 a.m., and I was sitting on the bed listening to the calm lake outside. My eyes were heavy, and I hadn't heard anything that whole time. I very slowly started to drift asleep. I don't think I was asleep for long, just a few minutes, when my eyes shot back open, hearing a loud thump. Then there was another. I stared at the ceiling, listening to slow, heavy footsteps walk across the roof on top of the lake house. They came from the front of the house, slowly making their way closer, before the footsteps stopped right above me, like directly above where I was on the bed. There was about 30 seconds where it was quiet, and in that time I realized something. My eyes shifted behind me, at the door to the balcony that was connected to the bedroom I was in. I suddenly heard something drop from the roof onto the balcony. I ran right out of the room, got my keys, and bolted to my car, leaving everything behind. I drove into the nearest town and to the police station. A few officers went to the lake house in the morning, and they really didn't find anything, except for that the balcony door in the bedroom was wide open. No more notes or signs of stuff being stolen. I have no idea what happened to me while I was at that lake house, but I haven't been back, and I don't think I ever will be. For a while in my 20s, I spent some time traveling the country doing seasonal work wherever I could. It never paid well, but the big benefit of a lot of these jobs was that it was usually in a cool area, like a state park or forest. And while the pay was bad, they provided free housing. A small room or cabin that was kind of like a dorm room. It made saving money really easy. And that, on top of the interesting experience, I kinda got hooked up on the lifestyle. Anyway, the year this happened, I had picked up a gig at a state forest. I'm not going to specify the exact job, because parts of it were fairly specific to the state forest, and I'd like to remain as anonymous as possible. But essentially, it was caring for the environment, keeping it protected and maintained and whatnot. The thing about this state forest, though, was that it wasn't one that people came to all the time, with big highways leading to it. It was far out and not that straightforward to get to, with mainly just gravel roads leading in and out. For work and housing, the forest was split into sections, about 15 miles apart, and 99% of the time, I was alone out there. I wouldn't really see anyone. I'd just do my work, then at the end of the day, head to my cabin, and that was it. Twice a month, I'd head into town 45 minutes away for groceries and stuff, but aside from that, I stayed out there. I had contact through radios between other stations, and otherwise would occasionally see a hiker or two coming down some of the trails. Now for what happened. It was 1 month into this seasonal job. This day, I woke up and walked 2 miles over to a trailhead, and everything was basically the same as any other day. I had a few things to take note of while I walked down the trail. But about a quarter of the way down, I ran into someone. Some guy I'd never seen before, but he was wearing a Forest Service uniform. No one had told me any other workers would be out on my trail that morning. And even stranger, when he passed by, I said hello, but he didn't even speak. He just hurried past me and continued down the way I came from. I stood and watched him for a minute, but then just continued doing what I was doing. I mean, maybe they sent him out here for some reason, I really didn't know. I was out on that trail for most of the day, not getting back to where my cabin was until almost 5 o'clock. When I checked out for the day over the radio, I mentioned the guy I saw and asked what he was doing out there. My manager took a whole 20 seconds to respond. He asked me to repeat myself, so I did. He said that nobody else was sent out there and that I must have been mistaken. I didn't know what else to say other than okay. I knew what I saw though, but I shook it off and tried to enjoy the rest of my night. There wasn't all that much to do out there aside from work, so when I was in my cabin, I didn't really have anything to do. It was basically a small closet with a bed and a dresser, and a small TV on the wall, and that was basically it. Didn't even have a bathroom. I had to use an outhouse a few hundred yards away from the cabin, between there and the road. I don't think I left the cabin for the rest of the evening, just hanging out inside and watching TV. Being way out in a forest 45 minutes away from the nearest town, the nights obviously got very dark, like genuinely pitch black, and also pretty cold, so I almost never went out after the sun went down. But in the middle of the night, I woke up around 2 a.m. with a really tight stomach. This was really unusual because I ate the same things every day, but whatever it wasn't something I could ignore. I thought using the restroom would maybe help, so I got out of bed, put on a small jacket, and headed outside with a flashlight. Every time I've had to make that walk through the dark to the outhouse was equally as creepy. I always started out walking slow, pretending like I wasn't scared, but would end up speed walking the rest of the way. I got in and sort of realized this wasn't that kind of stomach tightness. I think it was more of the kind you get as a fear response. A knot in my stomach, like a vivid gut feeling that something was wrong. And then I heard something move outside, brushing against a bush and moving through the forest. And then it stopped. I didn't hear it move away or make any more noises. Honestly, I was scared it was a bear or mountain lion, so I just stayed put, hiding for a long time. Didn't have my phone on me, so I had no way to know exactly how long, at least 20 minutes, and eventually thought whatever it was had to have left by now, and somehow I just didn't hear it. I opened the door a bit and didn't see anything, so I fully opened it and stepped out. I made it maybe 10 steps into the dark before my flashlight picked up a man standing in the trees just off the side of the footpath that led to the cabin. It was the same guy wearing the Forest Service uniform. He looked tired, and his eyes had this glazed-over stare. I barely muttered out hello, but when the man didn't move or speak, I lost my nerve and sprinted down the path to the cabin. I closed the door and stood in the middle of the room and stared at the door anxiously for an hour. I didn't know what the hell he was doing out there, or who he was, or honestly if he was even real. Maybe I was going insane. But just when I was going to take my eyes off the door, there was a knock. It wasn't rushed or heavy, just a light, regular knock. Scared the hell out of me though, because it immediately reinforced the fact that this was real. He knocked again. Then a soft, frail voice called out. He called out, "Please open the door and please help me," and other similar things, but something felt extremely off about it. He kept knocking. I didn't move or do anything, just frozen in fear. After 10 long minutes, it suddenly went quiet again. I literally stayed standing there looking at the door and waiting for the rest of the night. In the morning, when I opened the door, no one was there. I immediately ran to the outpost that had the radio and called in what happened. My manager tried to calm me down, but I could tell in his voice that he didn't believe me at all. In fact, he only made me more worried for some reason. I told him right then and there that I was done. I went back, packed all my bags, and got in my car, then headed into town to get a hotel for the day while I figured everything else out. It was while I was there waiting for a room that I met some older man who asked me about my work, seeing that I was wearing a Forest Service uniform. I told him about what happened and why I was in town. His face fell flat, and he told me a name, and he told me to look it up. When I did, I could feel chills go through my whole body. The first image that came up was a picture of a boy, a younger version of the man that I had seen in the forest. I was absolutely sure of it. There were a bunch of old news articles saying he had a Forest Service job at the same one I worked at and went missing a decade ago during one of his shifts. They never found him. I got out of town the following day and never went back. I genuinely have no idea what really happened, whether it really was the same person that went missing a decade ago, or something else. I honestly don't even want to think about it anymore, which is why I'm writing this. I hope it'll let me clear it from my head and move on.